And good evening. Thank you for indulging my my commitment to have Christmas carols be part of this show this evening. And that's a video of a little player box that we've had in the family for years. It's like my favorite thing that we do at Christmas time. I can listen to that thing all night long. And so, welcome to the Privy Council. Thank you for joining us this evening. And tonight we're gonna get a little bit further away from a more academic conversation that we had last week, but we're still going to stay in the realm of asymmetric risk, and we're going to talk about how that asymmetric risk may take form in our lives in the not too distant future, if a couple of things go a certain way. Guys, Joe, how are you this evening?
Hey, you know what? I'm well and good. We did our first session of a new Bible study tonight, and I had 8 guys in there, so pretty solid things going on.
No, that's good. That's good.
Amen.
Cool stuff.
Mike?
Went the wrong way with the button. Is anyone else on?
Yeah.
Okay. It goes just my pick. Okay. I'm doing well. Thank you. A little challenged with the fucking buttons, but I'm here. Everything's good. I was saying earlier that I'm tired because I was cross-country skiing today. So, that's the way it is when you get old.
Can we get a weather report?
Are cold. Fingers are cold from fondling those bunnies.
Yeah,
I'm just saying.
Snow bunnies.
I just want to make the observation that Mike earned it.
It ain't as blustery weather-wise here as it is where Brother Ron is. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Ron was going to be here this evening, but I think they've gotten 3 feet of snow in the Black
3
Hills.
feet.
Yeah. This is a big storm, boys.
And 6-foot drifts and all the rest, all that goes along with that.
Hunch, I've read it.
So whoever it was who had the battery in the trunk of his pickup truck, exactly the right sentiment right now. Have 12 hours of power wherever you go. Yeah, I think it's you, Joe. Yeah.
It's me.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea.
Jim, how are you?
I'm good. The East Coast is surviving. DC is still crazyville. It's everything we expect from it, but they are our representatives, and we have voted for them directly or in absentia. So we remain ever hopeful, Stan.
Yeah.
Whoa, yeah.
So I did see, and apropos of our topic being China this evening, I did see that the Senate voted to ban TikTok in the United States. So
good luck with that.
They did that this evening, and
good luck. It's a good thing, I drawing hard lines in the sand about collecting electronic information is not a bad thing to do. Which is, if platforms are difficult and challenging and violating the norms of society, our society. I hate to be bigoted and crazy, but if we have a judgmental paradigm by which we're willing to say, TikTok, you guys don't store data correctly, I'm down with that. That's when I actually don't mind the NSA, the CIA, and Homeland going, there's just something wrong here. The difficulty I have is it's been 36 months in the transition to, maybe there's a problem here. You should just look at it and go, if they're storing data, there's a problem, right? If they're a PRC-based company, I don't care whether it's Hong Kong or quasi-offshore, there's a problem. Call it as you see it and move forward. So I think we're making progress on that front.
I would love to agree with you, but I don't think it has anything to do with the core issue. I think it has to do more with Biden trying to set up straw men to negotiate with the Chinese around a number of different things. Look, just like when the girl who was the daughter of the founder of Huawei was under house arrest in Vancouver for 2 years? Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing happened. Not a thing happened. So it's all kabuki theater.
But there's good seafood.
There's that, but there's good seafood in Shanghai too. So
Never eat a golden pompano. Never,
uh,
never, never.
Shanghai hairy crabs. If you've never had one, you need to. It's
No, sorry, not my gig.
I
I've
know
looked at them
they're
since I was
wonderful.
10 years old and been terrified of them.
They're tremendous. They're
Yeah.
tremendous. And you should be happy that we won't be missing any payments to Ukraine, at least for a week, because the House has voted to extend funding under a continuing resolution for a week while we work out another big $1.7 trillion spending bill for fiscal 2023, so that the new Republican House majority has nothing to do with spending for the entire term of 2023. It's a shit show, folks. I'm sorry. All right, so we're
Is
gonna,
statehood for Ukraine in there?
huh?
Is statehood for Ukraine in the continuing resolution?
It would be less expensive because at least we'd have some of the revenue coming out of Ukraine, or a bigger piece of the corruption would be going straight back to us. But I Joe, as you know, my comment is it would be easier and cheaper just to make them a state. But
Yeah.
I don't think that's in the cards. Not anytime soon. Watcher, can we get started? Let's go ahead and dive into tonight's topic. Fat tails in the Taiwan Strait. I know some of you are probably wondering what in the world is a fat tail, or you've got your own definition of what a fat tail is. I suspect ours is going to be a little different than yours, but
I heard once that fat tails make the world go round.
In certain
Not the same thing.
Not quite the same thing.
Isn't it kind of a Harley Davidson motorcycle? Isn't it a motorcycle?
It's a fat boy.
Oh, that's it. Yeah.
That's
So
fat.
my experience is it's a Afghan sheep that people slaughter and eat on a tarp on the floor. But that's a different world.
Is that before or after?
Fat tail sheep. Yeah.
All right. So that's probably more information than we actually needed. All right, let's move on then. Well, this is where, and I'm going to do this just to punk Sibley because he didn't show up. He's busy working on risk analysis, where he could have done much more. But we were going to let Sibley talk about and try to encourage you to buy a copy of Mongol Moon for Christmas. We even stole his portrait picture from Twitter. And I tried very hard to translate something from English into Mongolian, but all the translation bots I could find wouldn't translate into Mongolian, and so I just used Klingon for this.
Same thing. Same thing.
Same thing.
Except for the body
I wouldn't have known.
Yeah, the body scarring's not there.
Yeah, the body scarring's not there, but I thought Klingon would work in this instance. So. So this is where we get to drag him for the sequel instead of try to sell books for him. So boys, have at it.
I really enjoyed his book.
Yeah.
So.
If you read it when it first came out and you forgot the story and can't find it, buy it again. While you've been waiting on the sequel.
No, exactly. No, but it's exactly that kind of book. I mean, I enjoyed the book. I have to say. I was introduced to the book by you many years ago, and I bought it and read it and had a great time reading it.
As a young man. You read it as a young man, right? In shorts at prep school, no doubt.
No, I was a bit middle-aged at that point, but you know, I'm going to be very decrepit and old by the time the sequel comes along, so it'll be good.
All right. Well, we've given him enough credit then for this.
I will point out though that the opening scene occurs on New Year's or Christmas Eve, so. Might want to read it before Christmas Eve.
In all seriousness, if you've not read it and you're wondering what all the hype was about and or what the bluster's all about, it really is a great debut novel for somebody. And I know for a fact that Mark is up at 5 o'clock in the morning most mornings, trying to figure out that new chat app that writes for you. You know, the thing that we talked about the other day, and is programming the shit out of it, trying to get that thing to finish the sequel for him. So we'll see how that goes. But
so this is where I put in a plug for all of our speakers and our friends and our network of people. Is everybody who writes fiction around their lives has really interesting observations about horizon scanning and forward looking thought. I don't think most people understand how much fiction intersects with reality. So I'm a believer in the fact that people who spend 30, 40 years doing something and then choose to sit down and do the discipline of writing a book deliver some really interesting observations. And they can get dated, especially in the sequel cycle, uh, but it's valuable. It's been valuable to me in my life. And thanks for taking the time and being disciplined. And I enjoyed reading the books.
Yeah, it's great. I've already put my my expectations aside. I've told Mark that I think he becomes this generation's J.D. Salinger, and this book is destined to be Catcher in the Rye, and nobody will ever know what happened to the author until he's 96, and they find him, still trying to come up with the next book. But I hope that's not the case. But let's see. Let's see how it does.
Amen.
Joe, you're muted on this.
He ended it literally in the middle of a scene, so he needs to at least resolve that.
Yeah, at least resolve that. Fade to black. And all right, let's move on. Let's get on to the topic this evening. Previously on the Privy Council, this sounds like Yellowstone. I'm just gonna just briefly, if you weren't here, we talked about asymmetric risk and what it is, how it has the potential to generate outcomes that are massively skewed, either good or bad. On the good side, I think Meghan Markle has benefited tremendously from taking the risk she took. On the bad side, the picture of Harry is worth 10,000 words. And if any of you guys saw that, I refused to watch it, but I did see the video on Twitter where she's sort of taking a shot at the Queen while he's sitting there on the couch looking like he's going to boil over. I got a feel for the guy. I mean, that's just insane to continue to be married to that woman and suffer the slings and arrows of being just ignorant to that degree. So anyhow, back to asymmetric risk. It's the thing that we like to think about in the context of predicting outcomes of things that we're looking at. And so we're going to try to do that this evening in the context of a hypothetical assessment of what might happen in the Taiwan Straits. So let's move on to tail risk. These are fat tails. Now, I saw Cannon's definition in the chat. That wasn't bad. But statistically speaking, fat tails are, if you look at that bell-shaped curve, as we assess risks and outcomes, you've all seen this. This is something that we're all familiar with. And as you can see, about 70% of the probability of any particular outcome occurs within one standard deviation of the mean. Or within two standard deviations, it's 95% of the possible outcomes occur within two standard deviations. But when you get out of that end of the curve, things can happen that skew that. And this is what's come to be called a fat tail. You also hear it described as a black swan event. And so we're going to look at this. Much of what you're going to see tonight is work that was done by Prudential Global Investment Management, PGIM, big money manager, and they did this. They went out and interviewed about 400 of the largest asset managers in the world. Together, they manage about $35 trillion. And they said, well, what are the things that are worrying you? And these are the top three risks that came back in this. And they all have to do, one way or another, with the Taiwan Strait. So I don't know if you guys spend a lot of time worrying about what's going on in the Taiwan Straits in your lives, but I can tell you the people who are managing all the money in the world are scared to death of what we're going to describe to you this evening as a possible outcome.
Stan, I thought it was kind of interesting when we were talking before the show, and we posed this amongst ourselves as, hey, do you know anyone thinking about this? And the basic answer was, yeah, no. No one I know, voices this sort of concern. And I also posited, probably snidely, nor is POTUS, our president or anyone in his administration. And we were just kind of bantering it about, but, it is interesting that, there is somebody actually looking at this stuff and looking at it very deeply, and that's a good thing.
This is a pretty deep dive into what could happen, and I think the outcomes are such that it demonstrates very well a couple of things we talked about. That the more complex the system, the easier it is to disrupt in the context of asymmetric risk, and the dependencies that have occurred on the planet in terms of things that go on in Southeast Asia. So if we move to the next slide. So cause and effect, a plausible headline that could generate a series of multiple tail risks. So we're going to look at three things that relate to the Taiwan Straits, three tail risks that sort of build one upon another. We start off with military conflict in the Taiwan Straits. And I'm going to let our military guys sort of talk about this to a great degree as we talk about what's a framework. And just in full disclosure, tonight is not the night that we're going to do order of battle, and we're going to talk about, and we're not going to talk about, the third division of the 4th Mechanized Group of the China or the PLA or this or that or anything else. There'll be a time for that perhaps, but tonight what we're looking at is, okay, assume a boat, right, and assume a conflict, and what are the things that will occur that could very well impact your own life, and what are sort of the things that you might think about that in the context of being prepared for it. So if we go back to the slide program there, and let's go to military conflict. Joe and Mike, I'm gonna let you take it away. Talk about a blockade.
So I think that a blockade is actually the more likely outcome, and actually it's the one that's the hardest one for us to deal with. With an actual attack, it's pretty simple. The enemy is attacking, you can repel him. With a blockade, it's sort of an action short of war, and you've got to decide at what point are you going to intervene and how far can you push to try and run a blockade before the other side takes kinetic action. And I honestly think that China, having just ran this as a drill after Nancy Pelosi was there, I think that that's the most likely response for them. They like the ambiguity and the confusion it causes, because you can't just blast your way through a blockade because technically no one has started shooting at each other. And you don't want to be the side that does. It creates a lot of ambiguity for us. It creates a lot of issues for us in trying to figure out how to respond to it. And it will not take very long for an effective blockade to completely shut down that island. I know we talk a lot about the number of semiconductors in the world that come from Taiwan, but the raw materials for them don't come from Taiwan. A lot of them come from North Carolina, and a lot of them come from other places in the world. So a blockade would be highly effective in bringing Taiwan to its knees pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think a blockade is a highly effective sort of move here. And one of the things that makes it effective about a blockade is that if you tried to breach a blockade, and Jim and Mike, I'm going to ask you because I think you guys are both pretty familiar with this. I got into this discussion with somebody who is worried about this, and my comment to them was, yeah, and they said, well, why don't we just go in, sort of guns a-blazing? And my answer was, well, we could have done that 7 or 8 years ago, but the area deniability capacity of the PLA and the PLAF and the PLAN is much, much better these days. If we go back to that graph, that the right hand, this is a graph that shows you sort of the different capacity that they have. First of all the little dots on China are air bases. Secondly, then you've got a ring of S-400 deniability, which is sort of the scallop shape along the coast. And then the next is the DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missile, and then the Dongfeng 26 anti-ship. But I mean that the latter reaches beyond Guam. So to go back to the point that I made 8 years ago, Guam was, I mean, you could go get a suntan on Guam and not have to worry about Chinese missiles at any point during that process. So they continue to encroach in terms of their ability to project force against naval units in the South China Sea. Jim or Mike, anything?
Yeah.
I guess I want to throw an additional wrench into it. And we're gonna get into that slide in like 2 seconds. But I was looking at that slide, and it, Japan's trade reliance, I guess, on China is 20%. South Korea is 25%. And then when you kind of look at the level of response to what's going on in South China Seas as it relates to the Philippines, I kind of look at these allies looking at the United States saying, when are you guys, I don't really have a warm and fuzzy about your commitment to this whole thing, which kind of plays into your area deniability slide there with the range fans and all that kind of stuff. There's another long pole in the tent kind of thing to be concerned about. When you hear our president speak about our commitment, to me, it's not iron tight, I guess.
Well, he waffles on it, or he says something, and his staff comes back and says the opposite. So I don't know what it is. Are we still proponents of the one China policy, and we're going to back Taiwan if something happens, or are we sort of ambivalent as it relates to that? And Nancy Pelosi's trip notwithstanding, I still don't think we know what we're going to do. And so we've taken the concept of strategic ambiguity, which we've used to project as a deterrent with China, and we've turned it on ourselves. Because I don't think we know what we're going to do if something happens.
Well, that's kind of what I mean. There's just so many mismatches of rhetoric, and the Speaker of the House's authority to go to that country and make any kind of statements is, to me, it's just not the right message. It's not the right person to send that message. So anyway, there are a lot of questions, I guess.
And think about it. If you're the president of Taiwan, what the hell do you do in that situation? I mean, what are you prepared to do in that situation when and Jim can speak to this, when a significant plurality of your population doesn't want to go to war with the mainland because they've either got business interests and investments there, or they may be less rabid about Taiwanese independence. I mean, the Kuomintang, who ruled this island for a long, long time after World War II, was in bed with the Chinese mainland for a long time. So there was a back channel. There was all sorts of ways for things to occur. Jim, anything?
No, I can speak for a couple days on this. You have a really interesting challenge, which is you've got this incredible, innovative economy around Taiwanese democracy. Taiwanese, by nature, what they've created since '49 is exceptional, right? They produce most of our semiconductors. But there's a secondary economy that people don't watch, which is the symbiosis they have to deal with the mainland, right? So the Taiwan Straits, when we talk about it, we run a destroyer or an LCS through there, and fly the flag and do phone ops and all that. What we forget is there are billions of dollars of trade that flow through that strait, north-south, inter-China, right? But they pick up Taiwan too. So, trade is like gravity. You can't disrupt it easily. It doesn't go away. You can't move it. You can't say one day we're going to move this whole semiconductor thing to Arizona. It doesn't work that way. There are billions and billions of dollars and 5 and 10 year cycles of capex involved in moving things like that. So the concept of waving your hands and saying, well, we're just going to move it, it doesn't happen. You can't reshore that.
I don't have Jim, I don't have a lot to amplify on that particular point, other than I might have mentioned it elsewhere, but my father back in early 80s worked at Fairchild Semiconductor, and part of the whole thing was building a fab in South Portland, Maine, and that years
specialized fab. Very
Yeah,
specialized fab
to make integrated circuits. So
full disclosure, I know them well.
So we have taken some steps. We passed some legislation to lessen our dependence on Taiwan. And if you recall, Joe Biden was in Arizona recently and touting the fact that TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor, was going to invest $12 billion in the first fab that I think was, and Jim, keep me honest on this, 6 nanometer chips or 6 nanometer wafers, something along those lines. And now and so now they've tripled that investment. They're in the neighborhood of 40 billion to build 3 nanometer wafers, but it's 2027, guys.
Yeah. No, it
28.
They can't. It doesn't happen overnight. This is the argument on these strategic issues. It's 5-year, 10-year, 20-year, 30-year. And this is where the PRC has a distinct advantage. They plan in 5, 10, 20, 30-year cycles. We don't. Real simple. We just don't do it, right?
Yeah, we don't.
So there's this gap analysis on CapEx, and semiconductors is a perfect thing to track that most American and European peoples can look at and go, geez, that's really foolish, right? We're throwing money at all these other things, but for some reason we don't quite understand this concept of CapEx. And I think it has to do with the fact that we involve private entity. And so getting private entities working with national strategy has almost become abhorrent to the left. I don't think they like it. And we have to figure that out, right? We got to get over that hurdle, because if you're going to build fabs and you're going to plan semiconductors and you're going to actually support innovation, you've got to kind of bridge the creative gap and the CapEx gap, which means you have to get both the R's and the D's sitting there one day and going, hey, this is a kumbaya moment, right? We have to do this, right? And this is non-economic money. This is strategic national interest money. And we've thrown an incredible amount of strategic, quote, national interest money at the world in the last 24 months. But we have to make it yield. And I'm not sure we've achieved that.
And we've done that. We've certainly done that in the Biden administration in the context of wind and solar and other sort of energy aspects of this. We committed $8 billion today in CapEx money for South Africa not to burn coal, which
the Germans did the same thing. 800 million.
Yes, and so South Africa now is at peak production over the last 20 some odd years and peak pricing for their coal, and the Germans are burning every bit of it that they can get their bloody hands on. So I mean, our ability to correctly allocate that strategic capital money that you talk about isn't for shit, because we're buying influence, and you guys should recognize that it's not a coincidence that $8 billion to South Africa came the day after Cyril Ramaphosa found out he wasn't going to be impeached. Okay,
that's important.
And two, on the same day on the same day that Joe Biden convened a Coming to America convention for 50 African leaders in DC, and so that was meant to get their attention and say, we're open for business, boys.
10% for the big guy.
8 billion for South Africa. You too can get in on the Joe Biden African lottery. And so that's
what it does, Stan, is it fulfills the fungibility of the carbon play, right? So we're moving carbon. And if we can't move it in a real market, it's kind of like the crypto play, right? If we can't remove it in a real market, we're just going to spin a market up. We're going to say, okay, I'm going to give you this, you're going to give me that. It's the quid pro quo world of, you can drop a heavy on me, and I'm going to say, okay, I can absorb $20 billion in this kind of offset. And so South Africa is selling, not using coal, right? It's a real simple thing.
I'm gonna, yeah, but those who watch most of us on Future Conflict know something about what our friend Gideon has said about the corruption and the inefficiency of Eskom, which is the power generation unit in South Africa.
But it doesn't change the model.
If you believe that $8 billion is going to go to make the grid in South Africa squeaky clean, net zero, and they're going to live like the Jetsons, right? That ain't going to happen.
It's not going to turn into Wakanda.
No, there's not.
No. It's worse than that, Joe. They're not going to become more like us, and this comes down to this American obsession with legalism, right? We really want this kind of legalism to dominate because the guys in Washington who've cast this, they've created this net of structure of agreements and legalistic push. They really want the world to be run by that. And what they don't understand is most of the world's looking at it and they put their finger up and they pull down their eyelid on their right eye and go, no, I'm not going to do this. Because you've created a world that doesn't work. It suits you, right?
Hey, guy, I just want to interject. We're kind of straying from the
yeah. We're going right back right now. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah,
I appreciate.
We got to work back to that. I mean,
yeah.
it fits. I know where you're going, but I just want to bring it directly in.
Yes. So if I go back to the blockade slide for just a minute, I want to talk a bit about that. In many ways, the blockade is probably the more difficult strategy for us to deal with from a strategic perspective. Because as Joe said, there's no casus belli for us to be in the mix and shooting. That and the fact that it's getting tougher for our Navy to operate effectively inside the range of this missile shield here. Yeah. And I want to make the point before we move on to a more traditional conflict that I asked the question to the guys at PGIM in terms of, well, does one of these outcomes have a greater probability of producing the negative outcomes that we're going to talk about here? And the answer was no, that in some ways the blockade made it even more of a fat tail because of the uncertainty, the policy uncertainty in coming to a solution relative to the blockade. And those of you who are old enough or studied enough history, you remember the Berlin airlift or know stories of the Berlin airlift where they basically, the Russians basically said, well, we're going to shut down Berlin. And Truman had to fly C-47s in and out of Berlin with everything for quite a bit of time. So
it just wouldn't seem to be a very attractive course of action. If we look back, less than a year, I guess, where we the United States had this supply chain debacle kind of thing. So this blockade, if we enacted that strategy, that cuts both ways. We are so dependent on stuff coming out of China. It would impact us probably more than them.
Well, it would impact us,
possibly.
I think, more than them in the context of who's better positioned to absorb it and or deal with any social outfall that may result from the economic issues that might arise from that.
I'm going to ask when Master Blaster did his embargo on Bartertown, it brought Bartertown to its knees almost immediately.
It did do that, and we're going to talk about some of the ways in which that happens. I'm going to ask that we just leave the slides up so that we can keep going here in a more efficient way. So the second aspect of this that may occur is a full conflict. Okay. And one of the things I thought was interesting was they posited the concept of what's effectively a preemptive EMP. So if you look at that little ship that's floating off there in the Pacific, a nuclear device is set off, which creates an EMP, which takes out both Taiwan and the Philippines from a power generation perspective as a preparation of the battle space prior to an invasion of Taiwan. And I'm going to let the military guys speak to that to a degree. I think what we've all learned in the last period of time is that this is no cakewalk. Doesn't mean they can't do it, but it's no cakewalk. And it's no cakewalk for a variety of reasons. One, the distance they have to cover is significant. The beaches are pretty well identified. They're concentrated. They're well defended for a while. But Joe, I mean, you've studied this to a degree. I mean, what happens if there's an invasion of Taiwan?
Well, that I want to point out first that EMP circle includes Guam, which is where an awful lot of our response forces for this would come from. They would also come from Japan, Okinawa, which is just outside of it. So that's problem number one. Problem two is that when you have a rough beach to invade on that's well defended, your other option then is airborne. Taiwan is not a place for airborne operations. It's rocky, it's mountainous, and what's not mountainous is jungle. So you're talking about twisted ankles and a lot of casualties just dropping in. It is not an impossible task because China is one of the first countries that invented human wave attacks. They're not real concerned about casualty numbers, but it would be a really tough nut to crack. Our problem would be in responding. So I think that this EMP slide might be a bit much. I don't think China really needs an EMP to do it. As we pointed out just a few minutes ago, crossing that anti-ship missile barrier is going to be a bear. And our only option to do it is speed. And at speed, you can't defend. So we would really have a tough time in responding. And it's something that both Max Morton and I have pointed out, that China could have Taiwan before we could even get a response force anywhere near a point in which they could respond to it.
Well, I think further to that point, aren't we moving fighter jets out of Japan because of the?
We're actually just rotating them, but we're not actually moving them out. They're upgrading to flying routers or some such nonsense.
Well, there's always that. I'm glad it warms my heart to know that we're expanding the force of the flying router.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. So this is a quote from Alicia Garcia Herrero, who's at the National University of Singapore, and she was interviewed for this. Bottom line is that the idea that there's a military conflict in the South China Sea was the third ranking concern in terms of global tail risks amongst folks that were interviewed by PGIM. And to go to Joe's point, yeah, we would have a tough time getting. But what's the fallout? I mean, yeah, we could all read in our morning paper about casualties on Taiwan, but why do we care about this? And the reason we care about this is that, as Ms. Herrero is pointing out here, is that economically it would be an atomic bomb. It would be something that ripples not just in Taiwan, not just in China, not just in Southeast Asia for that matter, but as we'll show you, that the impacts would be global.
Well, and there's literally no way in which to contain this, right? The fighting would not be contained to a specific zone. It's going to encompass the whole South China Sea. And I know that before the show, we were talking about the Straits of Malacca. That becomes a submarine haven, right? Both sides picking off the other. There's no way to contain this to a small geographic area.
Before we get into a discussion of this map, we can put it up there because I think it bears looking at, because it's the two nodes that you see are Shanghai and Hong Kong on the mainland. And I think the thing you ought to think about while we deal with these two super chats that we have is the last line in that bubble in the upper left, and that is 88% of the largest container ships transit this year in, year out, the Taiwan Strait. And that goes back to Jim's point about the volume of trade, the importance of trade, again, not just from a local perspective, but to the port of LA and the port of Savannah, Georgia, and all the East Coast ports are now in the China trade business as well. So if you want to pull up Hunch and Lance Corporal Veterans super chats, let's try and see if we can answer what's on their mind. Well, the question is, China push south at the same time. I don't know. My supposition. I'm not the grand military strategist. I'll leave that for folks on the panel who are. I think there's probably a role for North Korea in this, but it's probably not kicking off the Korean front. We're going to talk about a cyber attack later in the deck as one of the key aspects of this cascade of tail risks. And I wouldn't be surprised if the North Koreans were involved in terms of the cyber aspect of this.
I wouldn't actually see North Korea coming south. I would see artillery raids, artillery duels, and naval action in the East Sea, but I don't see them coming south unless the U.S. forces left South Korea to go and fight on Taiwan.
They may have more of a task in terms of interdicting or interfering Japan from getting involved in the defense of Taiwan.
Where we are significantly at a disadvantage is logistical bases of all kinds. Whether it's like Joe was talking about, air assets, Guam, ports in South Korea, Japan. We don't, and I forgot who mentioned Subic Bay. I'm pretty sure Subic Bay would be open to us almost immediately if this was going on. I'd chance a guess on that, that they would just say, come on in, because this conflict would certainly spread to the Philippines. So it would be in their best interest. But that really is the biggest problem we have, is who are the friendlies in the area from which we can base any kind of attack, rather, other than an aircraft carrier, some kind of naval asset. And that's probably just not going to get it as far as the amount of mass of personnel you would eventually need to just dislodge somebody off of Taiwan. So that's really the long pole in the tent for us, is any kind of logistical bases from which to launch a huge campaign.
Well, Clark and Subic would sure be great, although they're well inside the missile umbrella. So what's the survivability of Clark and Subic in that period of time? And then there's a geopolitical concern here. And Jim, I'd like you to speak to this, because I know you've got knowledge of this. I mean, Duarte, who was the prior president of the Philippines, tried to be the Erdogan of the South China Sea and play the Chinese off against us. New president, which is Marcos's son, has more of a natural, almost predetermined genetic leaning towards the United States. And Imelda's still alive, and she's on the whole more pro-American than anything else. But if I'm the leader of the Philippines, or if I'm the leader of Vietnam for that matter, or Thailand, or even Japan to a degree, I'm going to have to really do some calculus here in terms of how far am I going to get committed to this. And we haven't talked about Australia. That's a whole different bailiwick down there. But the Philippines is really on a knife's edge in terms of what China could do to the Philippines in the context of getting directly involved in support of Taiwan.
My observation on the Philippines is they're our friends. The politics are complicated, but the average Filipino has a very strong nationalist sentiment, and they're very close to Iowa, right? So I think you'd be surprised how quickly they'd form around us. They like their freedom. We've kind of built them out as a good ally, and they are a good friend. So I think Subic would open up pretty quickly. It's open now, but it's open quietly. The difficulty we have is the scale of the problem.
Yeah,
China and trade are 70 percentile kind of estimates on pretty much every commodity. So that north-south pathway, that white fog that goes through the Straits of Taiwan, it's really hard to replace that. So this is the interesting strategic offset with China. If they decide to become kinetic or difficult in this discussion, they cut themselves off. They hurt themselves. But historically, if you talk to the China scholars, the guys who've been, the China watchers, the listeners, or whatever you want to call them, they look at this and go, they're willing to absorb an incredible amount of punishment. I don't know how much punishment the Chinese nationals are willing to absorb on behalf of the party. And you have to remember it's segmented. So they know that there's a boundary layer they can't go beyond. This is an immense amount of trade. It's catastrophic. So the tail risk observation is Chinese Communist Party CPC is on board or not on board. If they disrupt it, if they choose to do a military operation in this world, it's disrupted. You don't have a choice. And it impacts domestic China economy and the society, right? And China writ large, with the global Chinese community, and again, that's an ethnic observation, is a big deal, right? So that's every country in Asia, Chinese ethnic population. They rely very much on the economy of China projected, right? So if the party decides to disrupt that, it affects all those families, clans, organizations, and businesses. So they put at risk something. So it isn't without risk for the party, but it may be strategically right for them to go after Taiwan at some point. And again, we have to watch it. It's a micro behavior, it's microeconomic behavior based on the small economies around the clans and the families. And you have to watch that and understand what they're talking about. And hopefully there's a great amount of observation of that. I don't have those tools.
So what do we think is the knock-on effect? And let's take this back to an American context for just a minute. So I'm going to make a couple statements. I'm going to ask you guys to throw rocks at them or agree. And that is, from an American perspective, the disruption of trade here would be far worse even than COVID. So the impact on the largest retailer in the world, Walmart, and by definition or by extension to a large portion of the American population, it damn near might put Amazon out of business. Because if you've ever walked through an Amazon distribution center, almost everything that comes through there is made in China one way or another. So this would be another sort of almost worse than COVID sort of shutdown from a supply chain and from a potential inflation perspective that might undo everything that the Fed has spent the last year doing in terms of trying to cool off inflation with middling success. And that would also have a real impact on employment here in the United States, depending upon how long this goes. And that leads me to a conclusion. I get asked the question, well, what's going to happen? Is this going to be a blockade, or is it more likely it's going to be a full military conflict? And in some ways, this is really reminiscent, Mike and Joe, of conversations we had in January of this year about what's going to be the nature of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Is it limited goals and tasks, or is it full on, or what have you? And so this has elements of that same sort of conversation here. I personally think that they're more likely to execute a blockade to begin with, because it gives them the opportunity to test responses without getting fully committed to a full kinetic action in Taiwan. Because once that happens, all sorts of things start happening all around the world. I don't know how you guys see that or if you agree with that, but that's kind of how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I agree with it wholeheartedly, because they consider that all to be their territorial water and their own backyard, so they can do whatever they want. So if you haven't bought one of these yet, Baofeng Radio, you might want to do it pretty quick.
Get it now. They are good.
They are good.
Hey, I'm almost of the mind that if they were to choose an imperialistic kind of course of action, why not go the whole way? And I say that just because the United States is weakened in its supply chain as far as military equipment from what we've given away in Europe. Our ability to respond to this just from a materiel point of view is, I would say, questionable.
Good word. That's the word I was going to use.
Yeah, and that's a good observation, Mike, particularly in terms of our military readiness from a munitions stockpile and other aspects.
Right.
And so the calculus there may be no better alignment of the stars. You've got a weak person in the office of the Oval Office. You've got a military that is short on recruiting, short on munitions, very involved in a conflict in Central or Eastern Europe. You don't have the treaty obligations, the sort of cascading treaty obligations like Article 5 in ASEAN or APEC or Five Eyes or any of the other, or the Quad. None of that stuff exists. So let's not let them put that in place. And so maybe that is the outcome that has the greater. I just keep going back to Sun Tzu, and that is winning without firing a shot. And I think that there's an opportunity that they may have the ability to execute that. Because again,
they've been on track to do this in the next couple of years, but right now there has never been a better time, and it gets better every day. We have the EU already announcing that they're out of munitions. We've got the UK admitting that they're deeply embedded in Ukraine, and they're not going to really be able to execute themselves pretty quickly. I mean, if I'm Xi, it's looking pretty darn good. There's not really too many downsides here.
I did just want to, you got Lance Corporal's, what do you call those paid things?
Super
chats. Yeah, I mean, he's got some comments, and I would say almost those really kind of apply to the scenario where you're doing the less than full war thing. I would agree with. Yeah, I mean, all what he says, that's all true. But then if we start going down the road that Joe, I guess we're all kind of saying, the timing is pretty good for this. Those become a little less important, to a degree. I mean, it's just full. It's 100%. It's on. So those subtle pieces of non-kinetic warfare are a little less enticing. They're not irrelevant, but they're just not. If we're at war, those things, they'll sort that shit out. Government propaganda won't mean diddly squat unless it's internal to China. To manage their own population. That might be one thing.
I'm unaware of a cadre of Taiwanese cam girls that we have to worry about either. So
I'm not so sure.
I don't know.
No, I'm not so sure that you're not aware of them.
Oh, no.
And the other super chat I want to talk about is Mr. Scott's, the Snow Buddies in Taiwan. I am telling you, I'm going to take a personal interest in that, and I'll be the point guy for that particular issue.
You're going to scope that out? Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. And you know what? I see Peter mentioning Kinmen Island and Penghu. I've long predicted an attack on Kinmen to be the indicator that something else is coming. I would see a sweeping of Kinmen at the same time they did a blockade as a pretty smart move by China. So, because if you're going to do a blockade and you've got Kinmen behind you, it doesn't make any sense to leave that there. So,
no. So before we leave this, let's talk about where we see China's aggression posture right now, because there's been some stuff that's sort of interesting that's going on, and we talked a little bit about what's going on in the Himalayas and one thing and another. But I've also been reading that we've had more and more aggressive aircraft incursions from the mainland. I know, Jim, you watch that pretty carefully. What's going on there?
It's going to be the keep the water boiling kind of concept, right? I mean, a couple of people are writing about this. The interesting thing is, I think most of the American discussions around China are in such small teams that they keep it compartmentalized. So you're not getting public disclosure of thought, which I think is dangerous, right? I'm a believer in public disclosure of thought, not necessarily policy, not necessarily strategy, but talk about what you know. Um, we know that China is concerned, right? Uh, Nothing happens without the central military commissions. Nothing happens without uh, the party. So the things that are going on with India are not, they're not surprising, right? Those people are in direct communication with Zheng Donghai. They're talking about this stuff. 300 people don't march up a mountain to engage the Indians unless it's a planned exercise. So they're full court press, and she is going to go out and engage everybody commercially and in a friendly way and in a strategic way. But in the background, they're going to be tapping, right? So somebody today in our thread, brought up the fisheries in the South China Sea. Well, it's a fishing season. Awesome. Uh, but the fishing season means the Vietnamese Navy and the Vietnamese Coast Guard, the Philippine Navy, are going to be called upon for the next 6 months to engage aggressively, right? And the big risks there are that somebody makes a mistake. The good thing is the PLAN, the Navy in China, is much more capable and professional now than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So you're hopeful errors don't get made, but errors can be made, right? And that's where the conflict comes from. But my take is the party has got the full court press on all their neighbors. So they'll be pushing the Chinese. They'll be trying to figure out a way to execute around Bhutan in the highlands. They'll push hard in Pakistan and Kashmir. They'll push hard on the Taiwanese, and they'll push hard on the United States. So it's going to become one of those things where they will create the justification for NATO running ships through the South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits to justify long-term commercial activities, right? And so you just look at those white vessels moving up and down in the Strait and the volume of trade. Everybody has a vested interest in keeping trade open. So China has a challenge in breaking that covenant. And I'm going to guess they don't like that word. And if you brought it up with them, they'd probably slap you down. So,
yeah, I watch what's going on with them, and it just strikes me that coming out of the National Party Congress, in the face of the demonstrations that occurred, to me, and this is just me projecting, so this is worth what you're paying for it. But I think I have a sense that they've sort of said, okay, you guys want us not to lock you down? Great. We, the party, we're prepared to absorb. If the United States had 2.5 million COVID deaths, we'll absorb 3 million COVID deaths. And we won't even look back at this particular point as it relates to the population of China. And yeah, we're going to buy Pfizer's antiviral, but we're not going to do vaccines, mRNA vaccines. And so you wanted it, here you go. And they're not even counting asymptomatic cases at this point. So they've just sort of said, okay, COVID, go for it. We're gonna move forward. It's gonna be an economic problem. You've asked for it. We're gonna do it, and we're gonna ratchet up our posture in terms of projecting power in a lot of other places simultaneously. And this little thing down on the line of actual control is one. I think Taiwan's another. I saw today that Xi has said he really kind of likes Putin, and they have similar personalities.
They got similar personalities, exactly.
And that he was doubling down on his commitment to the Russians and actually bringing Belt and Road now to Russia. So I think we're at a point where the Chinese have said, you know what? We're waiting for the flop. It's all in. You know?
It's where fiction engages reality, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
All right, let's move on. We've talked about this. We've already covered that. We'll move on. We've talked a good bit about this, but I think this graphic is useful in the context of the magnitude of trade. We've talked about all the little white ships, but you'll notice that the preponderance of that trade, or the largest portion of that trade, circles right back to the United States. So we would be really adversely impacted, second derivative sort of impact from the shutdown of trade in Southeast Asia. And I don't think we need to spend any more time on this particular slide. What does it mean? When this kicks off, you're going to see the same sort of drops in both local and other marketplaces, given the world impact of that preceding slide on trade. You're going to see stock markets respond to this all around the world. You're going to see significant drops in terms of whatever. In this instance, this is an example of what happened with the Russian stock market.
Yeah, I want to point that out. What's funny is it says the military conflict in Ukraine, once deemed highly unlikely, has proved to be a potential tail event that investors didn't see coming. Guess what? We're falling in that same pattern again. A lot of the punditry is saying, nah, it never happened. However, the stars are aligned, right? There's a pretty good chance that it very well may. So we haven't learned.
Very good. Next slide. And that brings us
to tactical wisdom. Cool. So, hey, if you want to learn how to make yourself a little more resilient in this type of a situation, pick up my books, the Tactical Wisdom series. You can find them at Amazon. You can also find them at tactical-wisdom.com. We start with the very basic skills and gear you need to survive, and then the rest of the books are 100% skill-based, and they teach you the skills to move in a contested environment where there might be bad folks around who wish to do you harm, how to exist and camp, and maybe set up a defensive perimeter for your home or your small village. As Stan likes to point out, we're all moving back to 1400 Europe type villages. Ways to set up some defenses for that, and then
Punji sticks, yeah,
right on with some sticks. And then we move back into some more advanced skills with scouting and patrolling. We're working on a first aid book now, and then after that, we're going to get some field skills, which will actually be making the punji sticks and making fighting positions, making all kinds of
dipping them in sheep dung, yeah, and all that good stuff. Yeah,
building root cellars. Be a good thing. So you can go there. Also at tactical-wisdom.com, there are some blog posts there where I talk about things. I apologize right now for the one I wrote last night. I was a little angry about folks who keep telling me that I can't intervene and I can't stop other people from being harmed because I have a family. Your family is not more important than anyone else's. You have a responsibility, and you can't complain about it if you're not willing to do something about it. So get off the couch. But we're going to get back to some more skill-based content here pretty soon. I do have a new video dropping tomorrow on my YouTube channel where we're going to talk about how to build your bug-out bag, or not bug-out bag. Forget that. I don't even like that term. Your get-home bag. How to get from work to home, what sort of supplies you should have in that backpack and everything. So pretty cool stuff tomorrow morning, 10 a.m.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
So what happens? So we've now talked through a situation where conflict ratchets up, either a blockade or invasion in the Taiwan Straits, a military conflict of one kind or another. Trade is interdicted. Economic harm has been done to the United States and literally everybody from a trade perspective. And markets have responded by selling off to a degree. And so the next tail risk that our fund managers at PGIM surveyed are concerned about is what happens in those situations like day follows night. Is there's a liquidity crunch, and what happens? What is a liquidity crunch? Well, the best example of that we've seen in recent years was probably in 2008 in the great financial crisis when people just were in risk off mode and trying to get the cash, and that really is disruptive to financial markets. So we've got markets dropping left and right, and there's an aspect of this that we'll talk about that's not obvious, and that is it's not always the markets or the securities that are most impacted by this, because they are impacted. It often means that managers have to sell the stuff they really don't want to sell to raise the cash they need to meet margin calls. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So this is an example. This happened in London in September of this year. Okay. And that is pension fund managers in the UK got caught flat-footed when Liz Truss, you remember Liz, she lost the prime minister's position to a head of lettuce, I think was how that went down. Anyhow, she made a bunch of statements about what they were going to, the fiscal policy of the UK, and the next thing they knew, the Bank of England looked around, and the marketplace for British government securities was tanking, and they damn near cost them 6 or so of the largest pension funds in the UK. Well, that was one country, one event on a political platform that never got enacted. So that gives you some sense of how fragile these markets can be when a panic sets in. Let's expand that now. Play this mind experiment with me. Expand that to the point where you've got 80% of world trade that's interdicted by a blockade in and around the Taiwan Straits, and everything else that's going on along that. And think about how you felt if you were around in 2008 when Lehman Brothers went down, and we all thought that Bank of America was going to go down, and that Goldman Sachs was going to be next, and then Morgan Stanley, and then maybe even JP Morgan at that particular point, and multiply that by not just the United States, but by Europe and banks in South America. And the liquidity can dry up in a heartbeat, and it's very, very difficult to get it to bring back. But this could be a natural second wave of tail risk from the reaction in financial markets to a conflict in the Taiwan Straits. Next slide.
It's worth noting that James Wesley Rawls wrote an entire series of books based upon this tail risk, a liquidity crunch in the U.S. and its follow-on effects.
Yeah. And where does he live these days?
He is directly adjacent to the duchy.
Indeed. And what I want you to take away from this slide is Carmen Reinhardt's quote there. Is that in a crisis, it's what you don't see that usually gets you. And my God, that's been played out time and time again in the context of the crisis that occurred in the late 90s, early 2000s with the dot-com bust, and occurred with respect to, the fact that waitresses had 6 adjustable rate mortgages to buy income property in 2007 because they could, and we sold mortgage-backed securities around the world. And so this is what can happen in that instance, and that is nobody knows where the bottom is. Nobody knows what the fix is, but we know that we're in a crisis, and we know we're all trying to get to cash, and we're climbing over each other because we don't know what stuff is going to be worth in a week, in a month, in a year, in that instance. So this insecurity, this sort of financial fragility is the second contagion effect beyond the interdiction of trade that could occur. And think about this for a minute. If this is the blockade scenario, there's not been a shot fired yet, right? So this is the fragility that can occur in these instances, and the fact that there's 400 asset managers that rank this as the number 2 tail risk that they're concerned about in 2023 should give you some pause to think about that. And again, this is one relatively little example in September of volatility in what's called the gilt, which is the government bond market in the UK. But if you can see on that slide the sort of volatility that occurred in 2 days, that blue line and the black line being negative and positive there, that's fatal to financial markets. That disrupts a lot of stuff.
what's funny is if you attempted the same strategy they did to stop your own financial crisis, they would throw you in prison.
Yeah,
I'm
probably
going to
so.
write checks to cover my bounced checks.
Well,
That's literally what they did.
it's not that so much. It's I'm gonna so in that instance, it's I'm gonna sell the stuff that's really worth something in order to get the cash to meet the margin calls on the stuff that isn't worth anything anymore, and that makes the stuff that was worth something now not worth anything, and it's self-consuming in that perspective.
So Joe, the interesting thing about this model is it represents the responsible parties who try to market. So if you're willing to have the conversation, you actually make yourself vulnerable. And we're going into a market where market market buyers are going to be saying, "Hey, this is getting ugly, and I'm going to have the conversation with you, my investors, about this." And I think in this case, they were not fully transparent, but they tried. They tried, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Stan, knock me
Yeah.
down.
No, I think though it's different now. So in the great financial crisis, there was a lot of people who just wanted to shove stuff in desk drawers and say, "Well, we'll worry about that later."
Yes.
Okay?
Next September.
Next September. And so, but what all of the regulation that followed, that's no longer an option. So everybody has to mark to market every day, and in some cases, multiple times during the day, depending on where the volatility is in the marketplace. So there's no more. So Sam Bankman-Fried is probably the most recent example of somebody who just wrote stuff on Chipotle menus and shoved it in a desk drawer, and you see where that got him, right? So this is not an option any longer, and to some degree, that's brought forward all the volatility that occurs in these marketplaces because there's no place to hide. But again, what I want you to take away from this is first impact is trade goes to hell in a handbasket. That impacts GDP and employment, and then it kicks off liquidity crisis that impacts value of things that you're counting on in your 401k to retire on. So let's go to the next.
So I'm watching something now that does this. It's the spread between South Africa and Europe on coal.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. So the Germans paid the South Africans to not burn coal. Now the Germans are buying coal. Now our president, Joe Biden, has created this fund to pay South Africa not to burn coal. Europe will be buying coal for the next 24 months to make their BTU requirements. They've got to produce electricity, and they've got to burn something they can burn, right? There's no gas, so they'll be buying coal. So Europe, the EU, is paying South Africa not to burn coal. We're paying South Africa not to burn coal. It's an interesting model, right? There's money moving, an incredible amount of money moving for this irrational kind of concept of carbon offsetting. Where are you seeing this kind of come to an end? Where
I'm not going to take that topic up tonight because we've got enough to do. I agree with you. I think that is the current energy equivalent of the emperor has no clothes, right? And I think we could spend 2 days on that, and I'll be happy to do that at another point. But for now, I want to finish where we're going because
the short answer is it ends with rifles and knives in the dark. But anyway,
yeah,
that's dark.
So
yeah.
let me move on. And then the sort of cherry on top on this is a scenario where having disrupted trade, having disrupted financial markets, the pathway to capitulation from an economic warfare perspective. And this is straight Sun Tzu, okay? Sort of an approach on this. then the thing that they're really concerned about then is a cyber attack, and not just any cyber attack, but a cyber attack on the financial infrastructure that's fragile and under pressure in the midst of one of these scenarios where liquidity is dried up, nobody knows what anything is worth, and trading is difficult. And this is really scary because even I hadn't really thought about this in the context of how this ultimate sort of move might take place. So there's an organization called Continuous Link Settlement, or CLS, and I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. But the idea is that a cyber attack would target the foreign exchange marketplace, and we talk about how large, the New York Stock Exchange is, or the S&P 500, or the London Stock Exchange, or even the government bond market. All of those are dwarfed by the size of the foreign exchange marketplace, because that's literally all the money that's moving around in the world to pay for all the stuff that's going on. Okay. So the concept here that has these people scared is a cyber attack that disrupts the continuous link settlement program that drives the foreign exchange marketplace, with the idea being that if I have dollars that I want to change for British pounds and I can no longer do it, then everything grinds to a halt. Or if I can't exchange euros for renminbi, things grind to a halt. You can't buy oil in that scenario. You can't
For the
buy
record,
anything.
this is the plot of Dead of Honor by Tom Clancy in the Tom Clancy was right category.
Yeah.
Oh my God, fiction. One more time.
Yeah. So this is the thing that brings everything to a screeching halt in the context of economic activity. And keep in mind that if it's done correctly and it's a blockade, there's still not been a shot fired in this scenario, which to my mind is really sort of remarkable when you play this out. I don't know what the probability of that is. It's a fat tail. It's 3 standard deviations out on a normal bell curve. But it is increasingly possible. It's not something that's just been made up in the context. So let's take this up. And I'm not the person who can speak to the cyber aspect of this. If you're going to ask me what's the nature of this cyber attack, is it DDoS, is it whatever? I have no bloody idea. Okay, I'm old enough, A, not to know, and B, not to care. But people whose opinion I respect tell me that it's very likely. And so this is a gentleman who's a former Marine intelligence officer and now a founder and chief hacking officer at a cybersecurity firm. And he's absolutely right in this. And that is most banks are still running on mainframes that are, out of support for 20 years. And there's a huge underinvestment in the security, even though they're spending money on it like drunken sailors. There's still gaps in this. And if you don't believe me about this, and Joe and Mike, I'm going to ask you to straighten me out here where I get this wrong. But the Chinese hacked into the personnel records of the entire military of the United States, or at least a large subsection of the entire military of the federal government of the United States. That shouldn't be allowed to be possible, should it? I mean, the capacity to do disruptive things. The Russians shut down the Colonial Pipeline on the East Coast. There was no gasoline for 3 days, right? So this is not beyond the pale. And maybe the Warlock should speak to this, because this is right up his alley.
This is right up the Warlock's alley.
I find it kind of interesting in that, most banks are still leveraging mainframes. And then I look at Marcus H's comment in the comments. Most banks are running old IBM AS4, whatever that is, old mainframes. The only thing I can say to amplify this a little bit, this is just an interesting target if it is mainframes. And I say that because I worked on the transition from the unsuccessful FBI virtual case file that lost like $100 million through SEIC, and it ended up going to a different project called Sentinel, yada yada, all that kind of stuff. But the idea for the FBI was to move from paper an agent would come up at interview and he'd be writing stuff on a yellow legal pad, and then somehow depositing that into a mainframe computer, but it wasn't indexed in any useful way in modern digital kind of referencing. So one of the reasons why that project failed was because they were old IBM mainframes, and very literally we had like two people that were like 800,000 years old were the only dudes that knew how to program these mainframes. And the point really is that possibly could be the reason why it hasn't been hacked, because you got to find people that write code in the languages that are obsolete. And these people don't exist. They're not around anymore. So it's ironic that these old systems might be safer than something in more modern language. But as far as a risk goes, and as a target that is very that's a sexy target, because there's a huge payoff there if you're trying to cause mayhem. I think they hit the nail on the head as far as identifying a vulnerability that is of great concern.
Well, and as we'll see, it's not just shutting down these marketplaces that is the real risk aspect of this. It's the impact on the banks that are caught on either side of these trades. So let's go to the next slide, please. So let me spend a minute. Who is CLS Group and who is CLS Bank? Because I would suspect that most people watching this don't know anything about this, don't know who they are, don't know what they are. But it's a company that's based in Switzerland. It's owned by a consortium of global banks, so it's kind of like a club deal, and it's there basically to make sure it is the most risk-free aspect of settling the massive volume of foreign exchange trades that occur all day, every day, on a global basis. But again, it's I made the comment in the chat before we came on air. It's sort of like the United Nations, okay? And if anybody thinks that the United Nations is efficient and diligent in terms of protecting its data, you've never been to the United Nations. So it's vulnerable just because of its bureaucracy and the nature of the shareholding. And it's the CLS Bank, which is the actual bank that clears these trades, is headquartered there in Lower Manhattan in New York.
Looking at the bottom where it says payment versus payment concept, so you mean it's like a hawala?
So, yeah, it is. It's exactly right. It's exactly right.
I do investigations here. I'm well versed in the hawala.
But it's an instantaneous hawala, supposedly. Okay, in other words,
digital hawala.
It's a digital hawala.
I'm sending Abdullah to pick up 5Gs from you.
Yeah, exactly. Really. Did you see the guy about the thing? Let's go to the next slide. So this shows you what the target of this would be, okay? And that is, and here's, this goes almost to Mike's point, okay? And this is the really insidious nature of this, and that is most of the currencies that are traded in this are G20 currencies, or Western European or North American or sort of more developed world currencies. Interestingly enough, you don't trade the renminbi or the ruble on this platform. And their absence on this platform would sort of insulate them from the harm that would likely occur if you interdicted this payment system.
I mean, that's what. So the yuan, obviously, ruble, yeah. I mean, that makes this very attractive.
Absolutely.
As a target.
Absolutely. And so why do we care? Why do we care about this? Okay. So you see on the diagram here how this is supposed to work. It's that instantaneous clearing. But if the hack is done in such a way that you disrupt that, and one side gets hung with that part of the trade that doesn't get paid for, that creates losses in those banks, which does what? When a bank has a loss like that, what happens? they take a hit to capital, right? And this goes back to, now I'm back to the 2008 financial crisis, when they had all these securities on their balance sheet that they were told were AAA tranche of mortgage-backed securities, or a AA tranche of mortgage-backed securities, or whatever, and it all went to worthless in a short period of time. They couldn't take the write down because it would wipe out the entire capital of the bank. And I'm not talking about the Farmers and Merchants Bank on a street corner in Culpeper, Virginia. I'm talking about Bank of America. I'm talking about Goldman Sachs. I'm talking about Lehman Brothers. We were close to losing all those institutions had the government not done what the government did in that instance. So now the impact of this is, take that scenario and make it Europe and the United States and westernized Asia simultaneously, all hit with a charge to their banking system that could wipe out the capital of the banking system. So where are you now? You're at trade disrupted, unemployment occurring, financial markets shut down, banks at risk of even existing. And think about what that does and the impact of you wanting to make sure that you can go down to the grocery store and buy a gallon of milk tomorrow.
You call nationalism. So my point, Stan, you call nationalism at that point.
And do what with it, Jim? Because no matter what you do in that instance, so now what do? We nationalize all these banks, or we do an FDR? We have bank holidays for 2, 3, 4 days in a row while somebody tries to go in and undo the hack in this instance? I mean, this is there is no linear answer here.
No, but it's not. It wouldn't be.
Excuse me, one second. And the answer is not to go to CLS and turn the router off and wait 30 seconds and turn it back on. I mean, that's not going to happen. That's the extent of my technical knowledge. But I mean, that's not going to do us any good.
You see, but you're a trained banker. You actually believe and understand. They may do that, right? They may cast that web. It might become this is not what we are seeing. Don't believe it.
Well, I don't. That's okay. Then so Gandalf arrives, and a wizard always arrives on time.
No, don't deny it, right? Okay. How many wizards have we had in the last 24 months? There've been a lot.
Yeah, but I'm going to take the other side of that discussion for just a minute, just to reinforce what we're talking about. And so think of it in a situation where banks are closed for bank holidays because there's no capital. Your FDIC insurance on your up to $250,000 is now worthless in the context of that situation. You can't get money out of your ATM. You're no longer employed because of the trade embargo that's occurred in whatever, and you're sitting there, and in the meantime, the Chinese are still trading in the renminbi. The ruble is still convertible to the renminbi, and anybody else who's in the BRICS club who went along with this in the context of interoperability of their currencies. And it's such an elegant fuck you back to Western nations who want to keep these people out of the SWIFT network these days. that it is almost poetic in its elegance in that regard. I mean, it is mind blowing to me that this is a real and tangible risk that we face. And I'm jonesing on this because this is the world I live in. But
no, but it's a real it's a real and tangible risk, Stan. Yeah.
All right, so let's go to the next slide. And this is just me. This is just this woman who used to be at the White House, chief cybersecurity person at the White House, just saying that it would be really tough to stop the cascade of damage that would occur here, and that it would fall over. So let's go. And I'm going to try to summarize this, and then we'll be out of this topic. Let's go. There's 4 phases here. Phase 1, we'll talk about this. FX, foreign exchange, is spiked. Okay, so foreign exchange falters. Foreign exchange plummets. A third of all settlement. It impacts a third of all potential settlements. Banks can't rely on one another for exchange. Borrowers of dollars turn to commercial paper. Loss of ability to swap key currencies overseas. There's the ripple through this process. Let's go to the next slide. Phase 2. Central banks try to respond. Now, we all remember the Fed meeting in the basement of the New York Fed during the financial crisis, and the Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson, bowing down before Nancy Pelosi to pass the TARP Act and all the rest of that sort of stuff. But in this instance, the simultaneous nature of this crisis occurring not just in the United States, but in London and in France and in Germany and God knows where else simultaneously, makes this really difficult for even on a collateral basis, because what would happen early in this process is that the Fed is the lender of last resort to other central banks. Okay, they open what's called swap lines with other central banks, and that occurred in September when the Bank of England had to intervene in the UK. It activated its swap line with the Fed, and the Fed was transferring currency from dollars to pounds to the UK central bank in that instance. Well, that can't happen anymore. So again, now our first firewall has fallen in the context of central banks can't stand in front of this and make it go away. Now you start to see really long-term implications in terms of a number of asset classes. Okay, real estate collapses. Trade finance obviously takes a hit. International trade grinds to a halt, I think is a better notion. And now countries start to default on their sovereign debt. Kiss your retirement goodbye. And phase 4 is the cleanup, the long-term cleanup. It took us from late 2007 to early 2012 to clean up the great financial crisis in this country. Okay, this would be a decade-long cleanup aspect in this instance. All right, so that's your mind can take you wherever you want to take it, but again, this is a scenario where this could get kicked off in a situation where there's not even a shot fired in the Taiwan Straits. And if you thought all of that was hyperbole, I'll give you this out of Friday's Wall Street Journal that in my opinion shows you that there's already a foundation in place for the order of magnitude of the debt crisis that could be in the FX market. And it talks about years of it. There's a $65 trillion hidden dollar debt aggregate around the world that if this market begins to shut down is sort of like the difference between an atom bomb and a hydrogen bomb going off. Okay, so we've already built the sandcastle that this thing could come knock over, and it's at least $65 trillion in size, and I think it's ultimately larger than that, depending upon how long the shutdown occurs as it relates to CLS. So that ought to keep you up at night. If you want to worry about something, you can worry about that.
That's why we participate, Stan.
Yeah. Anyhow.
So, Joe, where are you on this?
Where I'm at is that, at the beginning, a lot of people were wondering how this could happen. Doesn't matter. What matters is the effect it would have on you. I've kind of studied this potential, not necessarily directly to the CLS, but to the stock markets in general. If there was some sort of a destruction of the record-keeping mechanisms, even for 3 hours in one day, we would be so unsure as to who owes who what money that it would cause these cascading effects. And people don't realize how big of an effect the foreign exchange market has on the price of milk at home. Seriously, it doesn't matter how it happens. What matters is what it means to you. And something like this can very easily impact the cost of gas, the cost of food, your ability to heat your home. You really need to pay attention to these things and understand this risk. This is the bigger risk out of all three of them, in my personal opinion.
I think so. It's the most realistic, really.
The easiest one to do, also.
And it's also like the best example of your asymmetric methodology. I mean, this is
nobody's fired a shot yet.
Yeah, minimal effort in relative
and huge
massive outcome.
So here's the question I want to leave us with here, and that is, and I don't know that there's an answer to it, but I think we're all better if we think about it, and that is, and I'd like Jim to give us his view because he's closer to this. But at what point does the Chinese government say that's a risk I'm willing to take? My currency's not in the mix for the intervention of the CLS. My currency, I'm going to take a hit from a trade perspective, but I've already taken a hit for 2 years with COVID, and I'm gonna drive domestic demand, and they're doing this as we speak. They're turning on the printing presses. There's going to be stimulus in the Chinese marketplace. They've finally begun to grapple with the real estate crisis, the residential real estate crisis in China. They may turn internal on this and say, we're going to fix our problem, but we're going to finally achieve the consolidation of Taiwan. And in doing so, we may pull down a lot of house of cards in Western countries. I don't know when that happens. I don't know if that happens, but I know that it could happen. And it could happen at a relatively, and again, this goes back to Mike's comment and where we started a week ago in terms of an assessment of, am I willing to take that risk leverage in an asymmetrical situation and say, yeah, I'll absorb that cost for the opportunity to achieve that outcome. That's the thing you got to worry about.
And you know what? This risk, if they take it, sets up all their other opportunities they want to take, because we'll be so busy dealing with this that no one can oppose them in the other arenas in which they want to take risk.
Yep.
China's already a pariah state. There's no downside to them.
All right. Well, I hope you found that interesting. I know it was a little long. We're sort of right at the 90-minute mark, but I knew we were going to run a little bit long, and I want to go ahead and I want to turn this over to some disturbing new information that we've received from Whistler, British Columbia, and that is last week we heard about the snow bunnies, and Mike's. I don't know what the bag limit is on snow bunnies in Canada. Bag limit and possession
It's
limit.
unlimited.
Okay, but there's elements of Commando 13 have been up there looking around and try to keep him safe, and we're seeing evidence that husbands and boyfriends of snow bunnies are arming up. They may come stack up on that Airstream trailer. So I just wanted you to
there
know.
is good news on that. I'm not the only Airstream here now, so hopefully they'll get confused and strike the wrong guy.
There
you go.
Inshallah.
That would be my hope.
Did you guys see, though, that in all honesty, the media ran with that photo as a real thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's some sort of right-wing militia.
Oh, yeah. Well.
Wow.
Well, if you're snow bunnies in an Airstream with some dude from Maine, I mean, you can get pretty right wing, no matter how liberal you are. You can get pretty right wing in a hurry. I mean, so tell us about the Warlock, Mike.
All right. A couple of administrative notes. First thing, I did drop the price on the what do you call them right there on the left, the signed series books. And I've already had 2 people buy stuff. I was watching on my other browser. So that might go fast. I don't know. Which was the idea. But I'm going to do that until the 22nd. I think if you wait till after the 22nd, I wouldn't really guarantee it's going to get to you on Christmas Day. So there's that sales item, and I am also putting out the 2 anthologies. If you do the math, you're going to save yourself 25% from rather than buying the books outright themselves. So there's a couple of ways to kind of get the gift or whatever, save a little bit. The books themselves, very similar to our conversations. They are asymmetric attacks to achieve very great value for small investment in relative terms. And I say in relative terms, if you take a look at the amount of money that we've spent going through a proxy like Ukraine, you look at the money that we're spending there versus the sort of very, very small team stuff I'm talking about. my actions have a decent ROI. So let's roll into the next segment. And you could find my stuff. My Twitter handle is COL Mike Bennett 1. My website is author, not the name author, but author as in writer, MikeBennett.com. How do you spell that? AUTHOR. Fuck, I don't know.
I say, author, how's your tapeworm?
I'm a writer, but I can't spell. So
I think
anyway.
Author was one of the best movies of the 80s.
Well, that was a while back. So that's where you can find this stuff is generally on Amazon. The Warlock series, any of these titles, Boom Slang. Who the hell else is using the word boom slang? Who else is using Zangazer? And my stuff will pop up. So let's go to the first slide there, Watcher.
So, as you know, guys, some of you maybe knew, over the horizons where we take a topic and we let one of the members of the Privy Council sort of give us his view on what we need to be paying attention on, things that will impact the news tomorrow. Not immediately, but I mean in the near term. So go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry to interrupt.
I guess I interpreted also the idea of the over the horizon. This is a topic that could be expanded on later on as a full evening kind of thing, because there's a lot to it. So I've only kind of done an introductory kind of deal in tonight's thing. There's 3 slides. We're going to end at the point where we talk about, Turkey is making a play as this hub for Europe for energy. So next slide, please. And all I'm doing here, you can see the left paragraph stuff. That's actually out of Al Jazeera. So I didn't, just take stuff out of U.S. context. I kind of used them as an example of the way others are evaluating and assessing Turkey in the larger, broader context of what's going on in the world. And as Stan would tell you, the maps on the right, the general idea, I'm just one to kind of orient you as to where Turkey is. They're really at a very geostrategic nexus. A lot of things going on in that part of the world, and they're in the right spot to influence a lot of things just physically. But this shared cultural or ethnic heritage is highlighted. I'm kind of, there's 2 aspects of it, I think, that are relevant or interesting, at least. The bottom map of Kurdistan, if you're not aware, Turkey basically is doing a genocidal war against the Kurds. That's a fact. But that Kurdistan, that very inconvenient truth, that inconvenient blob kind of goes into Turkey. It goes into Iran. It goes into Syria. There's little bits of it in between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and that just in itself, the relationship between Turkey and Armenia and Azerbaijan is quite complicated, and I'm sure Stan might amplify on that a little bit. Not a lot of love lost there with the Armenians with the Turks. They've had some pretty bad history, whether the Turks admit to it or not. The genocide that they performed, or I don't know what word we're going to use there.
Executed.
So it's a fascinating kludge of just physical area that they occupy, and they're using that quite a bit to their advantage, as we have seen in Ukraine. And I highlighted little points that I kind of liked, and basically Turkey is saying, we don't like the role that you have given us, West. We're bigger than that. We used to be the Ottoman Empire. We want to be treated accordingly. We are a NATO ally, kind of, sort of, when it's convenient. So they have a lot of little levers that they can pull to influence things that are way outside of their size. They're not in the same strata as the United States of America or China, but they're a hell of a lot bigger than you think. And if you're not aware, one of the things that's going on between Armenia and Azerbaijan is that little blob called Karabakh. I hope I'm saying that right, or close enough. So that is an enclave that is predominantly Armenian people, that live right smack dab in the middle of Azerbaijan. And of course, it is as a territory in contention. And that has caused a great deal of conflict over the years between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And Turkey, obviously, does not like the Armenians, but they support the hell out of Azerbaijan. So again, I mean, there's a great deal of potential just for conflict. And if we go to the next slide, this kind of it's just another piece going into, before I hit that last doozy. Here's just another. These are the sort of things that this little country, not really that little, but Turkey is influencing all over the place. Projecting power essentially in the Balkan area. Obviously, Azerbaijan already said that. The whole thing with the Kurds, that influences how they deal with Iraq, Iran, and they have a whole mess of stuff going on in Libya. So these guys are all over the map. They're doing stuff. And another thing, I don't think it's on any of these slides, but another thing to recognize is how much they're involved in making, their military industry. They're making submarines of significance, not crappy stuff. Obviously, you've heard of the drones that are flown in the Ukraine, very high quality, very low cost. So Turkey is flexing its, when I say Turkey, I really probably mean Erdogan, really flexing their muscles.
Mike, I think it's fair to say, and I'd like your view on this. I think it's fair to say that Turkey is right now, through a coincidence of happy accidents and planning on Erdogan's part, probably the most influential non-nuclear power on the planet. Yeah. And they've done that under the umbrella of their NATO membership, which has allowed them
great cover.
Almost impunity to sort of pull shit that other people wouldn't do.
Yep.
But they've, we talk about Putin being a pretty good chess player. Erdogan's a pretty darn good chess player. And in many ways, he's holding a pair of fives. He's not, he's not.
Well, Stan, you're the one that put the juggling while balancing on the ball title. Yeah. And that's absolutely correct. That's exactly what they're doing, what they have been doing for some time. And doing it very well, not going too far, against the U.S., not going too far against Russia, just right. They're just right, the Goldilocks kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that said, they could also slip up, right? They could fuck up, and then all kinds of hell breaks loose. Just throwing this stuff out there that they certainly have a great deal of influence. They got their fingers in a lot of things well outside of, their GDP, as an example. And a lot of that is just really because of their physical location. And let's go to the next slide that kind of illustrates the thing we were talking about in the beginning. And that's these pipelines. Well, so you see the black dotted line, that's Turk Stream. And I happen to attack Turk Stream in my second book, When Towers Falls, before kind of all this stuff kind of went to shit as it has recently. And there were a couple other pipeline endeavors that the South Stream that failed actually. But the idea is to circumvent Ukraine by using this means of getting gas into Europe. But apparently that was not enough. Now there's discussions, in that very top paragraph, to get stuff from their buddies in Azerbaijan, circumventing the people they're not buddies with, Armenia, and going through Georgia, and busting, straight west to get gas, out of the Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan and that sort of thing. So there's this whole hub, on one slide kind of picture, just to simplify it a little bit. In the bottom paragraph, talking about the Trans-Balkan corridor, yada, yada. So here's another play to be kind of consistent, I guess, with the economic side of what we were talking about with Taiwan. Here's the economic play that Erdogan is throwing out there, or trying to make some moves to become this hub of gas and energy type stuff. And I believe that this particular slide, there was another one I didn't get into. And in the very last sentence there, increased cooperation, LNG, U.S. So there's actually kind of two ways of cutting the pie on this gas hub deal. One is kind of a Russia play, Russia-centric, Slavic-centric play, perhaps. And then there's the other players that may also want to climb on board, with this idea of Turkey being a hub, because they're a NATO ally. And again, it goes back to Erdogan. He's just he's dancing on the tightrope, and he's got multiple ways to kind of pull a chain and get a good result for Turkey. And the point just is, from my point of view, here's another, in the series of my series of books, one of the big themes is I believe there is an alliance. At the top of the alliance currently, I have China. They're the big dog, and then probably below them you'd have Russia, and then you have probably Iran and Turkey, maybe competing, for who's number 3 or 4. And those to me are the big 4 that comprise an alliance that, without a doubt, wants to just kick the United States out of the top tier.
And the guys with the capacity to be the Franz Ferdinand moment are the guys of those 4 countries who are already a NATO partner. That's the duplicity in this situation.
And that really could be a good way to kind of, I'll open up for discussion. Duplicity is a perfect kind of introduction. What are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? These guys are not really on our side in a lot of ways. And they're NATO allies. So how do we handle this? How are we going to do this? How are we going to have relations with this particular adversary?
I would tell you that if it wasn't for the Strait of Bosporus, we wouldn't.
Yeah, you mean we just kind of cut them away if they didn't control the Strait of Bosporus?
Yeah, if they didn't control the Straits of Bosporus, we wouldn't need them, and therefore we wouldn't be in bed with them.
I'd agree, but that is not a condition.
That is not the case, right?
So that's too bad. So now here we are. We're back to square one. We're stuck with. We've got this just unruly, odd. How do we deal with this? If we were to encourage, say, this U.S., Qatar, Algeria, non-Russian gas hub, because there might be something in it for us, we would be empowering other endeavors that you saw on that other map where you had Turkey involved in Libya, that sort of thing. So it's a self-licking ice cream cone, and it's not good. So I just kind of I teed all this up as a big concern. It could be something that could be a full discussion at some time, but just for the couple of minutes we have, Jim, do you got any thoughts?
I can't understand why people, these countries, get so complicated about economics. They're going to make a lot of money, right? Oil, gas, wheat, it's going to flow through them. I don't understand why they're trying to placate us. They're just going to make an immense amount of money.
You
mean so much money flowing, non-dollar money through Turkey.
Just the Russian and Azerbaijan stuff. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, the last 6 to 8 months. It'll be money on a scale most people don't understand. So he's doing fine, right? So the premier can go up and go, "Hey, it's been good," and everybody will nod their heads and go, "Yeah, it's great."
Well, but part of that juggling while balancing on a ball is Turkey's economy is not great.
No.
And inflation. We talk about inflation. Inflation there is running in the high teens, and has for the last 2.5 years. So there's, so Erdogan's the guy on the ball. He's juggling. He's doing a really good job of working what he's got to work with. But I don't know how much longer he can keep doing what he's doing. A couple of things break the wrong way for him, and he could be in deep. The one advantage he has is that in the 2016 coup, and I'll use that word advisedly, he went in and he shit canned and killed a lot of, and imprisoned and drummed out of the military all of the officer corps who would have been the natural place to look for, as is what has happened in Brazil and may happen again in Brazil, but also as has happened in Turkey multiple times, for the military to come in and make Turkey the secular state that Ataturk wanted it to be when it was founded in 1922. Because Erdogan has led a really vibrant effort at the Islamification of the Turkish government, which that had never been the case up until Erdogan was elected, and actually his second term was when he sort of pulled the covers off of that. So he's embraced his role as an Islamic leader. He actually makes noises at the Saudis from time to time about who should really be the top dog in terms of Islam. I don't think he's going to win that argument anytime soon, but he's not above making it. And
right.
and he does that just to keep people off balance. You need to understand, I don't know how many people have ever been to Istanbul, and I don't know how many of you have ever been in the Grand Bazaar there. But the Turkish government is nothing more than a more sophisticated version of the Grand Bazaar. And if you like to haggle, and you like to barter, and you like to trade, you're in heaven there, because there is no price too ridiculous, no position too ridiculous that you can't take in the context of you can't see it behind me. There's a vase I bought but one time in Istanbul, and I argued with that shopkeeper for 2.5 hours about what I was prepared to pay for that vase. That's the mindset, and that's how it works. And no proposition is too bold to not be floated.
Well, that might explain why they've got this, kind of Russia-centric new pipeline hub, while they are entertaining an American, Algerian. It's just to keep options open. It's a negotiating tactic.
Sir, I have another buyer for this, and I can't let you have it for that price. Well, where is he? Well, he's going to be tomorrow. He's tomorrow. So it's this is worthy of a full discussion. And thanks for teeing it up, Mike. I think the other thing I'll throw into this mix in terms of natural gas, because it's a country that nobody pays any attention to. But it is part of Erdogan's grand vision of rebuilding a Turkic empire. With the Azeris are basically ethnic Turks, and if you a tricky track across the Caspian to the east, you run into Turkmenistan, and Turkmenistan is a country the size of France that looks like a lunar landscape that nobody would care about, except it is the 4th largest deposits of natural gas on the planet.
Yep.
And they lust for interaction with Turkmenistan.
Yep. That is mentioned on that slide just to keep them. So anyway, that was just there's a lot of things going on there, way bigger than the country itself, and because of its complexity and all these little facets it touches into, it might be worthy of an expanded segment another time.
Well, Tacticat's in for a while, so
nice.
We're gonna wrap this up. Next slide, please. So, those of you new to this is the Privy Council, serving at the pleasure of the Duke of Montana, micro-nationalist somewhere in northwestern Montana, who doesn't really. He's sort of the school that I'm the Duke and I can do what I want. So you won't see him around much. As you can see, the throne room is empty. He's not there. But thank you very much. We hope that you enjoy these conversations. We're going to get better and better at them. I do hope, though, that you take away from this things that you didn't know before you got here, and that we can entertain you to a degree, but we can also give you information as it relates to things that we think is going on. So we'll be back next week. We're going to take a look at what are the options for the Republican Party in 2023 and 2024, both tactical in the construct of what do you do controlling one chamber of the House, and then we're going to start a little bit of a conversation about presidential sweepstakes, and then the week after that, we're going to do a look back at 2022 and an in-depth dive on what we think is going to happen in 2023. So that's the next couple of weeks, and I sincerely, if you celebrate Christmas, I wish you all a Merry Christmas. If you celebrate something else, our best wishes for the holidays to you. It's the best time of the year. I hope you enjoy it with people that are near and dear to you, and that the spirit of the holidays fills your heart this time of year. It's an amazing time. If you're doing it right, it's an amazing time. That's all I can say. Guys, Joe, any final words?
No, I just want to remind everyone tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, I'll have a new video out. We'll do a little premiere thing over on YouTube on the Tactical Wisdom channel. That's not me.
Mike?
Yeah, it's not my phone. No, I got nothing else.
No, guys, I'm just asking you to sort of say, okay. And Jim, are you there? Or
I'm alive.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys, and good night. We'll leave it there for now. And thank you very much for stopping by.